What's up? Welcome back to the Cyrus King Show. Hope everybody's well. I wanted to kind of go into. I'm gonna. It's gonna be about spiritual systems in general, but it's kind of more about the Bible in a sense. Kabbalah, really Kabbalah. What separates? It's funny. It's really about Kabbalah, but it's really more of an old school Sufi tale, right? It's not even. I don't even know if I should use the word tale. Cause see, when you deal with Kabbalah and Sufism, the problem is that not all Kabbalists and Sufis are built equally when it comes to, stories and sometimes oral tradition that, one group might have some stories other groups don't have, right? So it's not but just saying. Now, see, when your Kabbalah says it's all in the math, right? It's all in the math. So the math is there. You just have to decode it. Sufis is about the math too, Abu Jad especially, but it's I would say they have I don't want to say longer tradition because Kabbalah kind of came first. It depends how you understand it, but I would say they have more influences from other cultures, and has kind of sharpened them in a sense. So when you deal with spiritual systems and you deal with creation stories, especially once you want to get into proactive magic, which is important. When you get into proactive magic, let's say proactive spirituality, because magic's proactive. Proactive spirituality. It's kind of strange because there's certain things that other people take for granted that we can't, right? So even when you do ancestor, but the science, some people don't say this, but it's the truth. Ancestor science at the highest levels when you go back to the first ancestor. That's the highest level. You go back to the first, and then you bring it. It's like going back on a trip, or you're building like a path where energy travels, and the further back you go, the stronger you get, and then you bring it back from that point to the point now, right? So, in a sense, spiritual systems are kind of the same way, in a way that most spiritual systems, creation stories. Now, when you go Hinduism, Buddhism, their creation stories, they don't really care about, like Buddha said, the world was created many times. Universe, not even the world, the universe was created many times. The Hindus kind of have that premise, but then, the followers of Vishnu would have a slightly different creation story. Followers of Shakti have a slightly different creation story. Followers of Shiva have a slightly different creation story. So creation stories from that angle wouldn't matter as much. And then obviously when you go into African traditions, it depends on which ones you want to go to. I like the more animist traditions myself, for me personally. The Bantu traditions and stuff like that. But, the West African traditions are famous. And obviously we got Egypt in the north, and Sudan, Nubia in the east. But normally you go back to the beginning, right? What happens in most spiritual systems is they're more about themselves. So if we go China to Angola, I'm gonna leave Angola alone because that is the beginning, is the Genesis point. I call Africa the Genesis point. So since Africa is the beginning, the humans leave that one alone. But like, you go to Greece, you go to Rome, you go to Poland, you go to Peru, you go to Australia, right? And they would have pieces of the creation story for sure, and they would have different versions of it. But if I'm in Australia and I say that I'm an Aborigine and I began in Australia, right? And they don't really say that. So the Aborigines kind of do the concept of dream time, right? It's a lot more complicated, especially to outsiders. But I'm just giving an example. You know what? Let me leave Australia alone. Let's say I'm in Greece. I'm in, Poland. I'm in China. And I got a creation story. And in the creation story, it kind of acts like the beginning was in China. The beginning was in Greece. The beginning was in Vanuatu, right? What happens is that that then becomes that becomes a bubble, right? That culture resonates with, but it's not as important to nature. So it's almost like saying you're kind of making like a spiritual matrix that your system occupies, right? And when you make a spiritual matrix that your system occupies, it's going to be temporary. Now, temporary could be 10,000 years. I do admit that, right? Sort of the difference between Lemuria and Atlantis. Everyone talks about Atlantis, but Lemuria is still around in a different form. Atlanteans are gone. You know, when you make a localized bubble of energy based on a system, it will fade. That doesn't mean it's not effective. But the higher level is to go back. And when I say go back, there are many beginnings. So just going back to beginning, play this. If you go back to beginning that you can't comprehend, right? That's actually worse, right? It's actually better to go back to the beginning that you could comprehend. So if we look at Genesis in the Bible, that's definitely not the beginning, but that's a beginning that's comprehensible to Adamites, or I like to say post-Atlantean humans, right? Now, when that's the case, what makes the Bible so unique, though? Really unique. It's not what's written in Genesis. Obviously, what's written in Genesis, yes, but also the oral understanding. So, hidden understanding, right? There's certain people, certain lineages carry, right? Including certain Sufi lineages. So, one way of understanding this is this. Eve came from a certain tribe, right? Let's say the Baka Bakata, the Pygmies in the Congo region. Adam came from a certain tribe. Let's say the Bushmen or the Sand people of South Africa. And in the Garden of Eden, they were taken from the Garden of Eden and they were put in the Middle East somewhere. Everyone kind of differs, but looks probably, I would assume, the Yemen area. So you have those two tribes, right? Or at least representative of those tribes taken to the Yemen. So in that perspective, both Africa and the Middle East is the start of the new Genesis. Now, what makes that interesting is that the Kabbalah, some of the higher, like the regular Kabbalist tradition that's going to say Abraham is the beginning and stuff like that. So, but the higher traditions would have that understanding, and that would greatly shape their understanding of lunar spirituality. So, meaning Christianity, you could say to some extent, Judaism, Islam, they're supposed to be solar systems based on the sun and Ra, right? Solar-based systems are like systems that are kind of that make you evolve into something else. So, in a sense, when you look at the Bible and the Quran, going from the beginning of the two tribes, right, then when you talk about Elohim or angels, then you're talking about, you could perceive them as angels, but if you perceive those angels, like if we look at it from the metaphysical standpoint, those angels kind of represent humans in a higher evolution, where both spiritual evolution and biological evolution come into play. So it's almost like saying it goes back to a beginning, and then it goes to our future. That's what makes it unique, because every other system doesn't go back to the real beginning. And again, Hindus are right. It's many beginnings, but if you pick a beginning that you can't comprehend, that doesn't it's useless, right? You gotta pick a beginning that you can comprehend, and so that makes it unique, because if you understand the oral structure, you realize that Judaism, Christianity, Islam would have lunar elements of it, where it's telling you the lunar story, but it's going from that to the future, where other systems keep you in a loop. They might keep you in a loop that benefits their culture. They might keep you in a loop that makes you specialize in a certain skill, right? So, for instance, if I say and Taoism. In the beginning was Tao, Yin Yang, 3 treasures, 5 elements, then the physical world. It's not bad. That's a very effective story. And in fact, sometimes that's more useful than the biblical story in the beginning. Right? Especially into healing and stuff like that, for sure. But eventually you have to add to that. Right? And so, because if you don't, that's sort of in a local bubble as well. And I'm saying a local bubble within that area, right? So, as a civilization, we're merging together as one, whether we like it or not, right? You have non-spiritual people, you know the word karma, yoga, right? We're getting Eastern principles, whether we want to accept it or not, right? Whether a person's scared of voodoo or not, when you hear that name, that word, everyone, you could. I've been in the freaking Fiji Islands, and they may not know exactly what it is, but they know. Oh, Haiti, okay, magic. They know. Right? I've been in the fucking Caucasus Mountains, and they knew that shit. To be honest, I'm not Caucasus, Central Asia. My bad, Kazakhstan. Right? I was hanging with people from the Caucasus Mountains, but I didn't get to go to Caucasus. But Central Asia, Kazakhstan, right? That was basically Russian territory. So, when you look at it from that angle, you realize that if you're looking for your systems, and look, even in the voodoo adepts from Ghana, right, they have a saying that they would say, voodoo, it's hard for even adepts of voodoo to explain because it has a different function. See, or because the system is localized, it doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean it's not effective. Because what the real truth is, you put your localized system with a universal system, you get stronger. If you use universal systems like what Kabbalah, Sufism, Gnosticism, Martinism, Christian magic, Christian Kabbalah was supposed to be, so I mean, if you go straight to the sun without the moon, you short circuit. It doesn't work. You end up half the time being atheist, which is why atheism is so prevalent in the West, right? Which are a so-called Christian society, right? Because that's what's going to happen when you take a sun system and you can't count. You don't got the moon. The moon is the base. You don't got that, right? Yeah, you're going to short circuit. The moon is the mother. Your mother trains you before your father does. Your mother takes you to your father for real. Father being the sun. So when you understand that, it's a big advantage. Because even if you were dealing with African traditional religions, the first 2 tribes is not even something most people know, right? If you dealing with a West African system, they're gonna act like they're the beginning. If you deal with the Nilotic groups in East Africa, now they're gonna be more complicated because they have a hidden ace in their back pocket. You got to go in the Patreon section for that type of shit. You guys my dude. Well, some of you, but got to support as well. I'm not gonna I've said this, and I said this a long time ago. We're in a time when the real is gonna show. There are a lot of people who teach, who I know Barnes and Nobles is no longer here, but it's Amazon now. But the only magic they know is from magic they got from a book, and they can barely understand that. They don't even know what magical books to read. To be honest, you can hear them talk. So I'm not going to give people ammunition to use and act like it's theirs. I'm not that terrible. I'm terrible, not that terrible. When I got people who I understand that my info, it is what it is. Like, you just look at my catalog. Like, no one's effing with that. Let's be honest. And then people get mad at it, but then they want to take it, and then take it to what you call the teachers that's more pleasing to their ego. So no, there's certain stuff you ain't gonna get that in the public section. Just telling you that right now. And FYI, I'm not presenting myself as an authority. An authority just show them through, right? So half these clowns you guys be showing, you guys be following, they haven't taken any oaths. They have no access to oral tradition. Like I said, the books they read, they barely know that. They go to other countries, sometimes get initiated, they get hustled. I'm just telling you the truth. You American, you go to certain places, right? Especially if you talk about some African traditions and stuff like that. You go east, if you just may not get it. You may not just get what you look for. You know what I mean? Like the east, it's very hard. If you go to some African traditions, and they look at you, and they tell you if you've never dealt with any spiritual system, I mean, no disrespect to Ifa groups in Georgia, but you see it down there. Those guys never dealt with this stuff before. Me? I never take no Ifa initiation or any African traditional religion initiation. But I tell you one thing. Brazil, Trinidad, Tobago, I went to Cuba when you were supposed to go to Cuba. Colombia, then we go Africa, so and those African traditions in South America, Congo, right? South Africa. I went to South Africa 3 years after apartheid ended. So no one over there is gonna look at me and say this is food. Like I'm kind of listen. Even you might be the king of the West, you don't know what they do in Madagascar. I know what they do in Madagascar. Just saying. That's not about bragging. That's about saying when you put that work in, they got to come to you with respect. So when you guys be following people who don't have that pedigree, I don't care if you went to the continent. You ain't a street dude. You fool. You ain't a street dude. You ain't a spiritual person. You think you're going to get the real stuff? They're going to give you what they want to give you. At least the East don't do that. Just the East is hard to get to be honest. These days, East is hard to get to. And when you get to the East, you got to kind of know what you're doing, because if you don't, they can just give you a version of it that only works in doses. So, this is not about attacking any system. It's about giving flowers. Christian creation story. Judeo-Christian creation story. That makes Kabbalah and Sufism so effective compared to other systems. Okay? Till next time, peace.